So once again, welcome everyone on the Scottish AI Playbook webinar. We'll be talking today about AI and cybersecurity, and we have an amazing guest joining us today, John. John Callagy, the head of growth and strategy at Cyber and Fraud Centre, as well as the co-founder of Cyber and Fraud Hub. And I think, John, it might be best if we start there with the centre, with their hub. If you could just introduce both of those organizations and tell us a little bit more about what you do there.
Yeah, no problem. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. Hope you get some use out of this. Keep the questions coming as well throughout. I'm more than happy to kind of go off in tangents if anyone has something interesting they want to discuss from cyber. So yeah, look at the Cyber and Fraud Center is a social enterprise that its overall aim is to try and make cybersecurity a bit more affordable and accessible to organizations in Scotland to try and create a bit more of a secure landscape to do business in Scotland. We have gone down the social enterprise route and are probably one of the first to do that. We're not sure if it's just the UK and Europe, but maybe further afield as well. We work on various different projects, including our National Incident Response Helpline, which if you are ever impacted by a cyber attack or a fraud incident, you can call it up Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and we will offer free support, advice, and guidance on whatever incident you are experiencing. It could be as simple as, I think we have a hack, we're not sure. Give us a call and we can help with that. We have a cadre of organizations who we will pass you on to if we can't do anything beyond the basics, or if there's forensics or anything like that. We have organizations who we can recommend. A lot of the work we do is revolving around testing and training. So when we talk about testing, we're talking about pen testing, vulnerability assessments, phishing tests, all that sort of good stuff, the hacking element of cybersecurity. And with the training, we do sessions where we try and upskill organizations from sort of top down, bottom up approach, where we have training for staff across the board, non-technical, technical, and also for senior managers, execs, board level, which is kind of our spiel and what we do. We also do various other bits and pieces around cybersecurity, around releasing resources and raising awareness of different things that we're seeing in our threat intelligence. Going back to the incident response helpline, as I was saying, the center is to support organizations. When we started running the incident response helpline, we were getting a lot of calls from individuals. There isn't a huge amount of options to get support if you are a victim of a cyber attack, or more likely a fraud incident in Scotland. Action fraud does not exist in Scotland, so you cannot call them up. You will be going directly to police, and police are often overworked and underfunded in terms of supporting cyber and fraud issues. So we decided that because of the amount of calls we were getting on our organization line from individuals, we would start a charity to support individuals, and that's where the Cyber and Fraud Hub comes in. So the Cyber and Fraud Hub is the first cybersecurity charity in Scotland, and I can confirm that because I had to do a lot of explaining when we were registering the charity about what it is and what we were going to be doing. And it was the first of its kind, so Oscar wanted to make sure it worked for what charities are supposed to do in Scotland. So the Hub offers free support for individuals who are victims of typically fraud, crime across a wide variety, and it's typically what we would refer to as digitally enabled fraud. So it could be a scam, like that you bought Oasis tickets on Facebook off a random person and never got them. It's stuff like that we help individuals with, and we also kind of show them what they can be doing to push banks to get money back, or contact Police Scotland in the right way. All these other elements that are quite confusing to navigate until you're facing them, and then you're like, I need to figure it out pretty quickly. So that's where we kind of come in. And we also do like training for different charities who might have volunteers, that sort of stuff as well. So that's kind of the lay of the land in terms of what we do across the centre and the hub. Hopefully that all makes sense.
Amazing. So just to reiterate and clarify, if you look for training, upskilling for organization or help for organization, you would go to the Cyber and Fraud Centre. If you're an individual at risk or facing fraud attack, you go to the Cyber and Fraud Hub.
That's it.
Amazing. Okay. Let's start with sort of setting the scene, I suppose, and talking a little bit about, the Scottish landscape of cybersecurity, but especially in terms of how AI affects it and what are the changes. When you talk to organizations, what do you see in terms of trends or common concerns that are sort of AI powered?
So if we look to the criminal side of it first, I suppose, which is the one that kind of gets all the news headlines and the one that people are always asking us about. AI is just the newest tool for criminals to use to try and hack into organizations. How they use it will develop over time. For a long while, there wasn't any good, clear examples of patterns. We kind of seen one-offs here and there. We have seen a lot more patterns emerge over the last while, of AI being manipulated to do certain things, whether it was creating malware really fast and sending it around pretty quickly, or creating phishing emails that look exactly like legitimate emails. Um, the way that AI is used by criminals will always be the same for any tool that is used by criminals. It has to speed up the process of getting money in an illegal fashion. So criminals typically won't spend a lot of time, and we're talking about the sort of day-to-day hacking as opposed to like nation state actors or anything like that. But the sort of the bigger worry, the day-to-day hackers, they're going to use AI in the same way other people are using AI, but for illegal and nefarious methods, which is trying to commit some form of an attack on an organization so that they can claim money. Now we're seeing a few different examples kind of come to light recently with the likes of deepfakes and the likes of phishing, but it all kind of ties into the same thing of the social engineering aspect of cybersecurity. It's just the latest thing to be aware of. Um, how advanced it will get, I, I I can't say. We won't really know until we see it. Someone in a session recently went, "And what about quantum computing?" And I was just like, that's not like, where do you even start? Let's focus on just having strong passwords. So there's like little bits like that that we kind of have to keep an eye on, but look to the sort of facts of what's actually being used and what's actually been found to be used. Like we're hearing different things through our threat intelligence about some financial institutions, finding some hackers are using different voice AIs to try and get through their telephone banking systems because it might be an easier path. It might be more vulnerable than, their secure websites or whatever it might be. So as things develop, we will see more of this probably cropping up here and there. But as is the case with hackers, if they start finding it's difficult or they're getting blocked out too easily, they stop doing it, and that's it. Game over. They'll move on to something else. So in one respect, we're seeing AI being used as a newer tool for ethical or for unethical hackers. And then on the other side, obviously, we're seeing a huge amount of implementation by organizations in Scotland of AI and all the various aspects of AI into trying to increase business processes and trying to increase their products and services and make them more desirable for people to be using. With any new tool, it doesn't matter whether it's AI or anything else, once you add something new into the organization, you bring in with all the risk that is attached to it. Um, just consider anything in the supply chain. Once you bring something in, that is going to be a risk for you. You might not consider it initially. You might be like, no, they're going to be really secure. It's a big, massive organization. We'll take sort of like Salesforce as an example as a CRM. If you start using Salesforce as a CRM, you take on the risks that Salesforce might have. So you might be like, no, they're huge. That'll be fine. And then they experience an incident, and that incident will have knock-on impacts to you. It's the same idea with AI, but it's different sort of considerations that you need to bring to the table. I guess especially when you look at what you might be using your AI for, what sort of data you're feeding it. Does this data have knock-on implications when it comes to GDPR? So there's a few different aspects of considerations that Scottish companies need to consider when they're looking at taking on an AI tool within the organization, but it has to be a similar approach to taking on any tool. Size up the pros and cons. What are the risks? Be aware of the risks and plan for if there is ever an incident. That's the usual advice that we would always give anyway. So the Scottish landscape, it's not necessarily hugely different to the rest of the UK or even a lot of Europe. There's going to be the same sort of crime being committed. We see a lot of this sort of attacking threats being from, Russia or wherever, China, Iran, but we've started to see now the likes of Scattered Spider being UK based and stuff like that, which means there's a different sort of threat coming through from that side when it comes to the Scottish companies. So yeah, with the AI related work, consider the two aspects of it. And when it comes to taking on something internally, what are the risks that are going to be? I suppose is the bits that we're seeing coming through.
Thanks so much. There's obviously sort of a lot of threads I want to pull, but when we look at the news, obviously recently a lot of huge companies affected by hacking attacks, M&S, the airports, the Jaguar
Yep.
stuff. Most recently, these are all big names. So I do wonder, how applicable or how vulnerable are small and medium enterprises, I suppose, in Scotland to those types of attacks? Because it feels like, it's the giants that are being attacked, maybe because of their complexity or, their visibility. But how relevant is this risk to our homegrown SMEs?
Yeah, I mean, it's as relevant to a small company as it is to a big company. Often, something that we hear, particularly from charities, is that, oh, hackers will never target us. We're just a small charity,
Mm.
that we're just a small target that we won't even have much money if they were successful or whatever. That's an easy target for hackers because they know that there isn't going to be strong security because charities don't have necessarily enough funding to be investing in IT infrastructure that's super secure. They don't necessarily have enough funding to be investing in like cybersecurity, outsourced or even internally. So hackers see that as easy wins. Um, you see, when it comes to sort of hackers and the way they approach attacking organizations, sometimes there's a very targeted approach because they want it to be in the news, and that will come down to the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, M&S. That sort of approach is they want to be seen. It's almost doing it for the fame as opposed to doing it for the financial benefit. Whereas other hackers are purely in it from a more like a business perspective. They are just trying to go into as many organizations as possible. It doesn't matter whether they have millions of pounds in the bank or whether they have just thousands. They will try and look through some open source intelligence, figure out how much you have, attack the organization, typically with some sort of either malware or phishing leading to malware approach, and ransomware the organization. And a lot of the times we're seeing that the ransomware fee will either be a fraction of what they've seen you have in the bank, or it could be the exact amount that you have in the bank, which is a very calculated approach. But the way they're looking at it is that if they attack, one M&S and they might succeed or they might not, it also brings a lot of unwanted attention onto them. Whereas if they do that versus attacking 200 different small organizations and they get a small fraction from each of them, it's more beneficial to them financially. So it's just as important for small organizations to stay secure. The main reason I always tell people is that big organizations can front up all these massive fees to get back online. They can pay forensics, they can pay external IT, external cybersecurity companies, they can pay negotiators, all these different aspects of a cyber attack that you don't necessarily think about before it happens. They're able to pay for that, whereas small organizations don't tend to have the bank reserves to be able to do something like that. If we look at some of the bigger hacks that have happened in Scotland, we'll take as an example, we'll just take some of the ones that have happened over the last few years. Like some of the legal fees that I've heard being thrown around with some of these are in the millions. When you're thinking about a hack, you never think about legal fees. And then all of a sudden you have to deal with solicitors who have very high fees per hour, and you're trying to deal with that and also trying to get systems back online. And at the same time, you're losing revenue because you might not be able to sell your service. Like I think today the co-op released a statement saying that they lost 260 million in revenue over the period that they were shut down during the attack. So it has all these other knock-on impacts. And for a smaller company, those impacts just seem to be so much bigger because there's less amount of room for them to recover. We often see when it comes to charities that if they get attacked in a large way and their systems are completely put offline and destroyed for whatever reasons, it basically means the end of a charity. That could be it wrapped up. Smaller companies have a little bit more resilience because they might have a better IT infrastructure in place from the start. They might have had a little bit more funding to put into that, and they can recover, but it's still very costly and it can put you back a few years if you were starting to like make moves in the right way. It can also destroy your sort of the brand public awareness of what you are. If they see that you've been attacked, they might go, oh, I don't know if I trust that organization with my data anymore. So there's all these other little facets that we have to consider when it comes to an attack. And small organizations, unfortunately, have to consider them probably just as much, if not a little bit more, than the large organizations, due to the fact that they have limited resources to be able to deal with them.
Mm. Thanks. And I suppose, going back a little bit to the AI context, I suppose when we were thinking about charities or small organizations, usually the first step that they experience or start playing around with AI is with chatbots, ChatGPT or
Yep.
Claude, your everyday tools, either free or paid versions. What are the security concerns or security considerations or biggest security mistakes that organizations do? Not just with the in terms of the shadow AI use when, employees use it without sort of
Yeah.
the knowledge or explicit consent, but also when companies do, introduce these tools even sort of above the board. What are
hmm
the concerns there?
So I guess it comes down to, again, what I was saying about how you use it and where things might be being stored. So like if you work, um, if you decide to take on some sort of AI tool and it all seems very legitimate and the company you decided to work with, you spoke to them, they have loads of other really reputable customers and you're like, all seems really good. And you're like, yeah, let's take it on. And you implement it into your organization, blah, blah, blah. The way that I would always say to approach this is the way that, again, the same way to approach other things when you introduce the supply chain is do the due diligence on their own security. And a lot of people don't realize this, but most organizations in the tech world will have pages on their website about their security and about what they're doing to ensure their security because it is basically impossible to work with any organization who has a high level of cybersecurity if you don't advertise the fact that your security is also high because some large organizations won't even look twice at you if you don't have certain certificates for testing your product or service. So I'd always say to check that first and have a look and see what it says. And if it says things like, oh, we've achieved certain certificates, here they are, and this is linked to our product or service in this way. We do our annual pen testing or we do whatever amount of testing on our service. Um, and we also have a secure by design policy where we've always like integrated security from the start. These are the sort of things that you need to start looking out for when you're implementing any new product or any new supply chain provider, ensuring that they're taking security just as seriously as you should be taking security because you want to have a strong supply chain. Supply chain attacks are one of the things that we're seeing happen now more commonly, and that was probably most evident. Um, was it last weekend? Yeah. God, time really is flying. At the weekend with the airline check-in software, that was a supply chain attack essentially. So always do due diligence on anyone that you are thinking about taking on. Have a look through and see what they're talking about, and then bring it up with them and be like, "Oh, we were just looking at the cybersecurity. Would you be able to tell me a bit more about it?" And it's often the case that the person you're speaking to is not going to be able to tell you a lot more about it than what's already there because they're maybe the salesperson or a business development, whatever, and they're going to know the surface level about like the product and talking you through that, whatever. But if you get an answer to that question, and it's very clear, and it's like this is what we do in security. That to me shows that that company is taking security very seriously. That it's not just the IT team or the cybersecurity testing team or whatever that are looking at the cyber, but it's also their sales and business development people. They understand that that's important too. So that to me would reinforce that this organization is taking it seriously. So that would be the start of what I would kind of look at if we were ever looking at taking on anything new with that. Also look at the sort of data and where that's being stored. A lot of organizations will just be storing data across the world in various data centers. That brings with it certain risks that we often don't kind of consider. As sort of an example, if you were working with, I think with most government agencies, they will require you to have any data that's being stored or used with them held in a UK data center. Could be wrong in that. It might not be all of them, but in the past, I've experienced that where they are very focused on having UK data centers part of whatever it is that they're doing. So there's little things like that that you just kind of touch base on and understand. And if it's clearly laid out, again, it shows that they're taking it seriously. They know that certain organizations have certain data that they don't want to be kind of have traveling, on underwater cables going wherever to be stored in data centers in other countries. So there's various things like that that need to be kind of considered. The next aspect is always what happens if it goes wrong? How bad could it be? If you are sharing some, very sensitive data with any supply chain provider, I mean, I'm like a broken record with this, but you have to consider what the worst thing that could happen is if they were hacked themselves. So if someone that you were dealing with and you were using your AI tool with them for whatever reason, and you were giving it some very sensitive data that you really didn't want it to be hacked for whatever reason, if they were to get hacked, what can you do about it? What will they do about it? And you can ask them that. That's a perfectly normal question to be like, so what happens if we get hacked or if you get hacked and the data is released in the dark web? How much control will I have over that? Are you just going to block me out
Mhm.
and try and work on securing your own systems and making sure the bigger customers are happy or whatever it might be? So there's a little few elements to consider on each of those things. And a lot of it you can't answer clearly just by doing Google. And it might mean some conversations. It might mean some thinking about what strategically you can do around this, whether it makes more sense to work with a different provider because they're offering more security, or whether you're happy to take on the risk. And that's what it all comes down to with these things. It's the risk management. Where do you see yourself being comfortable? Where do you see yourself being a bit worried about certain stuff? It's the same for every company. Like it's the same for cybersecurity companies. Like nobody can do everything themselves. Everyone's going to have to take on like accounting software, marketing software, all these things. But if what is it that's going into it, and where is it being stored? And what happens if some of that information is released on the dark web? There's all this various sort of GDPR repercussions when it comes to certain elements of that that might be end up being leaked or sold on the dark web or whatever. So these are the sort of considerations I would start with kind of looking at whenever someone new is coming on. They don't even really look at what the AI is being used for necessarily. It's more looking at what the company is doing with their own security. And then after that, maybe starting to consider where the data is being stored, what data you're sending it, and what happens if all of that goes wrong and the hackers actually breach and manage to leak a lot of data that, you know, your systems were secure, you didn't get attacked, but someone else did, and because of that, there's a knock-on impact. So they're the sort of considerations that I would always look to initially with a supply chain provider being added to your platform.
That's great. It makes me wonder about, specifically OpenAI, obviously that changes, like it feels like they change their privacy rules all the time, announcing that they're now storing all the chats, nothing's private because they were sued and they have to, collect all of that and store it. Now with the MCPs, they can just basically hack someone's mailbox just by prompt injection and this all evolves. And I suppose what makes me wonder is, how can you mitigate this risk of adding a tool that constantly evolves into your supply chain, into your daily operations, that changes, the company changes its policies, the data, there's no real transparency over how the data is used or a limited transparency. How do you mitigate those risks and
To give
still
you
use it in a way?
Oh, Greg, as I was just going to say, the most cybersecurity answer ever would be just don't. But that's not a fair answer because we're in a world where we have to start engaging with this no matter what to stay with the pace of business and what's changing across the world. So how do you kind of mitigate the risks? It's very, very difficult. But going back to what I was saying about how you're using it, like just considering what data is going into it and what would happen, and considering if there was an incident, how you would plan for that incident, how you would deal with explaining to customers, to your board, to various other stakeholders, investors, whoever it might be, how do you explain to them that you put all your trust into this product and then it was breached? And you have to understand that they all have a perception of these AI services as well. And if there's a public perception that maybe it's not that trustworthy, then if something was to happen, it's completely out of your control. But your trust would then dwindle because of that. When it comes to public perception, so there is aspects of this, and it's just an unfortunate part of the tech world, cybersecurity, and that it's the health and safety, and everyone who works there is always like, be careful and don't do this and don't do that. And, it's, kind of like the parents looking after the children and who want to go out and play in the back garden. And you're like, maybe not today, don't play with AI. It's one of those scenarios where because it's essentially Wild West, everything's still developing out. We don't know what things are going to look like, next week, never mind next year. It's very hard to stay on top of things. So we have to just be careful. Not going to tell anyone to not use a product, but just do as much due diligence as possible into trying to see what are they doing, and if there is a bit of smoke and mirrors, and if you're not quite convinced, try and speak to a person. And even still, if you're not 100%, you really need to size up whether the benefits of using it are going to outweigh the negatives of an incident while using it. So unfortunately, it's not a straight answer. There's no clear way of dealing with it other than what the consider what the risk is that you're taking on here. So it could be a case of we're going to use an AI tool in whatever way, but we're only going to give it like a small segment of our data that we're kind of like, if it was breached, it's all been encrypted or anonymized in some way that it won't be that relevant if it was ever leaked on the dark web. There's just little things like that that will be relevant to one organization that won't be relevant to another organization, but it does come down to kind of what risk you're willing to take on. And some organizations will just fly on and they'll be like, it's fine, we'll just take on all this risk. And then they may end up facing some huge fines in the future if their data was ever leaked for that reason, or if there was ever a controversy around some sort of sensitive data that was in there and someone else managed to pull it out for whatever reason. There's all this sort of stuff that we really can't say for sure how it's going to work because we don't know yet, is the clearest answer. You will have people say, "Oh no, we do know. It'll be like this, that, and the other." But when we deal with sort of hackers, it's so hard to predict different aspects of them. Like when it comes to nation state hackers, yeah, you can kind of predict what they're going to be doing. They're looking for disruption in some cases, they're looking for financial gains in other cases. But when it comes to sort of your day-to-day hackers who are just part of online hacking groups who are kind of doing it for clout more so for anything else, it's very hard to predict what they're going to be targeting, what they want to look for in these things. But at the minute, what we are seeing is targeted organizations to steal data and pour it onto the dark web and resell it. Yeah, that's just such a huge one we're seeing at the minute, or else doing a ransomware attack at an organization. So that's what we're kind of looking at. How you prepare for that is just trying to be as careful as possible. Unfortunately, like there's no one thing to fix everything with this. It's a cautious approach and it's sizing up where the benefits will be and where the negatives will be and being able to deal with the negatives if they were to come to fruition. And that's what like an incident response plan is for, something that we are always kind of prophesizing about and telling people to make sure you have an incident response plan. And that might be your 0 day attack, which is the most serious attack you could experience. Is your AI that it gets hacked and there's data in there that you didn't want to be in the public for whatever reason and you had no control over its security, and that could be the worst possible thing that could happen to you. And then the incident response plan that we always recommend to have will go through what you're going to do. It's basically your emergency fire escape plan or whatever. It's the same idea of that, but for when you get hacked. And I always say when we're talking about incidents always seem a bit easier before they happen, and then they happen, and you realize how emotionally draining they are, how tiring they are, how difficult it is to deal with, criminals or whoever else it is, how many stakeholders are going to be calling on you. So if you have that muscle memory from, you've designed your incident response plan, great, and you do your fire tests, but you do incident response tabletop exercises, whatever, and you kind of run through it, and then you're prepared, then you're willing to take on that risk. You can justify taking on that risk because you're prepared to deal with it if there is ever a fallout, for whatever reason. And that's the kind of like balance that we have to face into, and we've no choice but to face into it. Like, I mean, if you were to ask, some of the cybersecurity professionals how you kind of keep secure, they'll tell you just don't use the internet. It's just not possible. Like, it's just one of these things that we need to understand the tools that we're using. We need to understand, you know, it's like if you take a knife, you have to know that one side is going to be sharp, and the other one isn't. And it's like, without knowing that, you could cut yourself. And even still, you might cut yourself if you're being a bit clumsy and distracted or whatever. And that's what it comes down to with anything cybersecurity related. If you're taking on a new AI tool or any other tool, just understand the risks, understand how secure it might be in the way that you're using it, and prepare for the worst, I guess is the best way to put it.
It feels like almost like a health and safety, I suppose, doesn't it? Like a health and safety thing that goes way beyond just your standard IT team.
Yeah.
Um, but I do wonder, we spoke about sort of how vulnerable small organizations are in Scotland, and a lot of those um costs associated with tax, I suppose, or is something that larger companies are better equipped to address, and they have bigger teams
Yeah.
and personnel dedicated to IT security. But if we're talking about charities or small organizations in Scotland that maybe don't even have an IT team, let alone a
Yeah.
cybersecurity team, what are the practical things? You mentioned the incident preparedness report and the
Yeah.
fire tests. What are other steps they should take before they start using AI, or before they or at the very sort of early step to improve their cybersecurity?
Yeah. I mean, this is the bit where everyone realizes cybersecurity is just not glamorous at all, and it's actually boring. To get to like 90-95% secure, there's some things that like we take for granted that we should be doing. And the number one sort of defense mechanism that any of us has is passwords, which seems bizarre. And like everyone listening is probably like, how can you say passwords is number one secure? Surely there's some sort of mad, AI security tool that's way better. And it's like, when it comes down to it, you have to realize who's trying to hack you. And guessing a password is much easier and quicker using one of the brute force softwares or whatever than trying to manipulate technology in any way and get in through a back door or something. So, and passwords is something we all take for granted. Like, I imagine there's probably people on this call who might use a password that might be linked to something personal, that might reuse a password more than once, that might have a password that hasn't been updated in years and might be involved in some sort of leak with breach years ago. Like, there's so many of these elements that we don't kind of take care of because it's almost like constantly checking your digital footprint and your cyber hygiene and stuff, and it's really, really boring. But that is sometimes the difference between being secure and being uh, like being a vulnerability for an attacker to attack you. So when it comes down to passwords, what we always recommend is don't use anything personal. Don't use some sort of name that's related to a family member or a street. Don't use anything that could be Googled with some open source intelligence. So if you have like family members and you're like, well, how would they figure that name out? And you have an Instagram or Facebook account, hackers will have fake profiles to go in and have a look around and see, oh, your daughter's name is such and such. Maybe I'll try that or try a variation of it. And the tools that like are available for password hacking are they're so advanced, it can be done so quickly. Once you have something to work off of, that it's pretty easy. So when it comes to passwords, avoid that. Avoid using the same password more than once. If that password is ever leaked, hackers will try it across multiple accounts. So if your password for Facebook was leaked, then a hacker will take that and try it, on the bank account, to try it on these other accounts. So we always say never use it more than once, because if that one is leaked, it only needs to be changed in one place, not in 50 places. The National Cybersecurity Center will always recommend using 3 random words, because that kind of covers off getting a password quite long. Use a mixture of lower and uppercase, use numbers, use special characters, mix it up. You're kind of like, how am I going to remember these? Use a password manager. Password managers are game changers. It means you only have to remember one password as opposed to remembering all 100 and whatever passwords you have. When it comes to password managers, link them with your accounts. They will, you know, put in autofill passwords and usernames for you. It'll just make life much easier and quicker. People then say, well, what if that gets attacked? And that does get attacked. And password managers are probably under the most scrutiny of any service because of how much data they hold that's very valuable. So, and this comes back to sort of managing risk and where you're comfortable with it. But I would much rather have all my passwords being managed in a password manager than having them randomly dotted around the internet, forgetting most of them, and if any of them was leaked, people maybe be able to like hack into other stuff. So password managers are the way forward when it comes to passwords. You remember one password and it creates passwords for you as you go through. It's a really easy way of securing it. Once you're kind of at that stage, using two-factor or two-step or multi-factor authentication, it has a variety of names, but that really annoying thing that you have to use typically with your banks, that gives you a second prompt to make sure it's really you on the other end, use it. It is so, so powerful. If you think about how difficult it will be for a hacker to get access to that, there are ways that they will like social engineer people to give that information over the phone, but it does mean that your second device, if it's with you, the hacker can't get access to it. You have to release that information. So when it comes down to that, like if you have all that in place, then you're doing great. Like, because most people don't, and that's the truth. But that will get you so much security straight off the bat. Focus on passwords, get them right, great foundation level. After that, you're looking at updates. The thing that everyone hates doing because it disrupts whatever they were up to. Updates, I'm sure most people on the call will know about this if not already. They're basically just patches for security vulnerabilities. They often don't actually change anything that you're using. Someone has discovered a vulnerability and the company is trying frantically to fix it before it's exploited by a hacker. That's what updates are. People often change their tune when they know that about updates. It's one of these things that just has never been really communicated quite clearly to a lot of sort of end users, that it's a security fix, because sometimes it's embarrassing for a company to be like, oh yeah, we had a big bug and we have to get it fixed or whatever it was. But do updates almost immediately if you can. Get whatever it is you're using updated as quick as possible. Do not ignore them. Do not let things just sail on without updating your devices, your apps, whatever it might be. Doing the updates is so, so important. Do backups. Make sure that you have backups of things as well. It will save so much time in the long run. The big one for organizations is the backups and having data stored offline. The rule is usually 3-2-1. When it comes to backups, you want to have your backups stored in three different places. Two could be online, one offline, and make sure one of them is held somewhere completely separate from everything else that you would be using for work. So, like on a hard drive or something like that, removed from any sort of connections to the rest of your network. The reason for that is because we have seen a lot of cases where hackers infiltrate systems, stay on the systems and networks for the guts of, 3 to 4 months, have a good route around, navigate, find the backups, and then infiltrate the backups as well. So once you get a ransomware, you're like, we're fine, ignore them. We'll just kick things off over here on a new server or whatever. We have the backups. And then once you run the backups, the hacker will be like, oh, hello, did you forget that I'm still here? So having things offsite is also very important when it comes to backups. So those things, although they seem so easy and like so common sense or whatever, a lot of people just don't do them because it's effort and you don't really get much of a reward out of doing it. The reward only comes by nothing happening as opposed to getting something to happen, because nothing happening is good in cybersecurity. So they're the sort of approaches I would always say to get going and start with an organization. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. If you can get that moving, you're already in a better place than most organizations, unfortunately. So for charities, for small organizations, none of that really has a cost. You might want to spend on getting the updates or getting the backups done or whatever in some other sort of sense, hard drive or whatever. Well, it's really a small expense. The expense is time when it comes down to it for that sort of stuff, but it's a worthwhile expense, and that will get you so secure so quickly. Another great tip is training. There's loads of online training and resources that you can gain access to. Even through our own website, we have training going on pretty much every month. We offer our members sort of exclusive training that we will cater to whatever is kind of in the news cycle so that people can stay on top of that. That's always a good one because it's always an organization-wide issue, cybersecurity. It's not going to be just down to the IT team. It's not just going to be down to the IT person who maybe is also doing marketing and sales or whatever else when it comes to charities. It's going to be down to everyone. And when we look at what that means, hackers will not target people who are most confident with cybersecurity. They're going to target people who they think may not fully understand what a phishing email looks like. And having that sort of common knowledge within an organization of the basics, just, it can be the difference between an incident and just a silly email that came in that we deleted. Sharing information around this sort of stuff is important as well. Training isn't always possible. Cybersecurity can be boring and people can just opt out of it. Again, perfectly fair. A lot of the training providers are just there to kind of do a job and move on. But it's very important to try and do something so that people are a bit more aware of why you have to do things in a certain way, why password policies mean that you have to have a certain amount of characters and change it every other month or whatever it might be. That sort of level of understanding is important in an organization. So if there is no remit for doing training, you can share information within like Teams channels or whatever you're using internally. So say you see a phishing email, take a screenshot, put it into Teams channel, because it's probably going to go to other people in the organization and be like, just spot this phishing email, just be careful. And it always starts like with leadership as well. Like it's always about creating a positive cyber culture in organizations where people feel confident that they can report things to senior management or whoever else it is and prevent issues, double check things, having that healthy paranoia, as we call it. But that all comes from the cultural approach to it. And that's why I'm saying if training isn't possible, because training does sort of lead into that culture. Try to talk about it, try to share information, and try to be there to kind of like, if someone sees a phishing email, to try and explain to them what was actually going on with that. It is hard. It is difficult when we're trying to do a million other things and not focusing on, the health and safety, boring aspect of business or whatever. And there's no clear benefits of cybersecurity a lot of the times, as I was saying. So they're the sort of basics that I would look at focusing on to try and get your organization more secure. When you get past that, then you start looking at your IT systems. Then you start looking at where you're storing data and all this other bits like the incident response. But they're the fundamentals. We do have a free resource on the website, which I think is called cybersecurity strategy for small organizations or something. And it's just a tick list to try and go through, and it's split in between short, medium, and long term. And It's just an idea of like where to start. And you could go, oh, page one, passwords. No, we have a policy, we're fine. Great. Page three, or whatever it might be. You just kind of want to work through them and use that as a guidance and just make sure that you're thinking about everything because it's the bits often that we forget or we're kind of blinded by that is maybe the issue. So that would be what I'd say to start with and have a look at that. Don't worry about, all these fancy tools that are being advertised or all these sort of, different cybersecurity companies that are advertising on Formula One cars or whatever. They are not always relevant to small companies because the stuff that they do is very advanced and it would be great sometimes to have it, but do the basics well, and it can get you quite far in this world of cybersecurity. So that will be the sort of fundamentals of what you can do initially, and then obviously what I was saying about the incident response plan, preparing for an incident. The idea of it is just exercising. It's just creating a muscle memory that if there is ever an incident, that we can handle it in a way where we're not fighting each other as well as fighting a hacker, because it can be stressful. It can be difficult to figure out who's responsible for which element. There can be finger pointing. There can be all these sort of other aspects, which is really, yeah, it can get a little bit nasty and stressful, and people often move on from organizations after it because they just have seen a side of people that they just didn't realize existed. So prevent all that, get an incident response plan, fill in the details, who's responsible for what, who's going to do what if an incident occurs, and then test it. And by test it, I mean doing it like a tabletop exercise, which is, if you don't know what it is, it's essentially like Dungeons and Dragons style, but cybersecurity. And we just take you through a sort of incident and what it will be like. So there is a free tool on the National Cybersecurity Center website called Exercise in a Box, which has loads of different scenarios that you can just download and run through. It's a series of like slides that will have different things happening on each one with a few injects. So the first one might be a staff member has clicked on an email. It turns out it was a phishing email and they've downloaded some malware. What do we do? And then you kind of just have loads of different scoring matrices to answer and then see how well you did. So it's a good way to just try and get the ball moving. Those things, they're about an hour and a half, maybe an hour, but you will need a few people in the room to do them. If you get to a stage where you're like, oh, I'd prefer to do something that's customized to our organization, that's something we can do. If the requirement is there. But use the free stuff initially, get a feel for it and see how that works. So that would be my recommendations from a start. It's quite overwhelming. Just try not to get bogged down by the amount of stuff that you need to do. Focus on the bits that you can do, make a plan, and then just start targeting them, start ticking them off the list, start moving in the right direction as opposed to ignoring it.
Mhm. It sounds like the simplest things really do make a lot of impact and are worth addressing, like the passwords that you mentioned and
Yeah.
the backups. Um, I would encourage everyone to, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. But one other thing that I wanted to ask, or rather, maybe reflect back, is that it's so interesting that we're still, we're talking about sort of making passwords better and make backups and all those sort of basic things of digital or cybersecurity hygiene 101 basically. And at the same time, here is AI just sort of entering the scene and AI agents and this FOMO that a lot of business leaders are feeling that they have to implement it, it's as soon as possible. They don't really know what for, but just so that they
Yeah.
can stay on top of things and stay in the race and not be sort of made irrelevant by their competition. And it just feels like this stark gap between sort of, basic understanding and reaching for tools that we're told are so powerful. But at the same time, our passwords are our children's names or whatever.
Yeah.
Is this what you're saying when you speak to organizations, or is it reflective of the reality?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much because we move so fast, because our culture and society moves so fast with new technological innovations that we're always kind of chasing. And you see it with like a lot of people who assume, oh, younger people are going to be way better at security because they have, phones in their hands since they were very young. They're so much more clued into how these things work. And we often see that people assume they're going to be better. But in actual fact, it's the opposite because they've become so trusting of devices that they've been, ingrained to believe that it's fine. I don't need to worry about security because that doesn't happen. So that's like it's a really worrying element there. The other big worrying element is that a lot of people still see it as embarrassing if they click on the wrong link and they download something the wrong thing. They don't tell someone about it. or if you lose money personally, like because you like tried to get a ticket for something or whatever, you don't tell anyone about it, you just keep it locked up, and there's a taboo and embarrassment. And that's hugely problematic for the people who are trying to prevent cybersecurity becoming a bigger worry across the world. If these incidents aren't reported into police, then police don't know they're happening, basically. When it comes down to the statistics that determines whether the cybersecurity unit are going to get more funding or not, it really is all about whether people have been reporting in these crimes, whether organizations have been reporting in these crimes. Like there are some crazy stats over the last while that show it's just not being reported because through our incident response helpline, we've seen, X amount of calls come through. We've seen X amount of million kind of come through our books, and then we'll have, a report from police saying, "Oh, they saw this," and it's like, "How have you seen less than us?" Like that doesn't make any sense. So you can tell that even without sort of proper categorical data on this, it's completely underreported. So it's kind of a weird place to be where you're chasing AI because you need it, and then you're trying to half concern yourself with cybersecurity because you're supposed to do it as opposed to need it. It's just like the optics of cybersecurity is always going to be, the sort of black hole that you're going to pump in a lot of money and not get anything out of it. Essentially, if you did spend 50 grand on a pen test, for your service, at the end of the day, all you're going to get is a report that says that's secure. Hackers won't get in, or you might get a thing that says, "Well, here's 10 vulnerabilities, fix them." And that's it. Like, so it is an interesting industry where trying to market it or advertise it without living off of the sort of fear that hackers bring about, like use our service and prevent being hacked, or else,
Mhm.
it's very difficult. And cybersecurity is still a little bit of a wild west, especially with a lot of the cybersecurity companies now taking on AI into their own tools and kind of showing that. Although we're still struggling to see where the benefits are across that, because hackers will know that it's there and then manipulate it in a different way. So it's an interesting, uh, I guess, time to be in cybersecurity, but it's also a very difficult time to be in cybersecurity because people aren't really giving it the sort of the due attention or importance until something happens to them, and that's
Yeah, sounds a little
pretty
bit
much
like insurance.
pretty much yeah. But
Yeah.
oftentimes we see people who get hacked and they change their tune so quickly afterwards, and they're like cybersecurity evangelists, and they're just talking about cybersecurity all the time after they've been hacked out of X amount, or after their company has been decimated for whatever reason. It's after, which is always unfortunate in these things because you want people to be taking it seriously from the get-go and not having to deal with a serious incident, which is going to be emotionally and mentally traumatizing, essentially.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's hard to balance it. It's hard to have enough people to do everything an organization needs to do. But like I was saying, when we're talking to people, it's the same recommendation all the time. Start with the basics, bite-sized chunks. Don't get overwhelmed because then you won't do anything. Just start with passwords. Make sure everyone is using strong passwords. Are they all being stored safely? How are people storing them? If you hear someone's using a notebook to store them, then you need to panic. It's like these little things that it's often neglected because we won't worry about that. We'll worry about introducing this new AI tool because we're going to take in a lot more sales if we get this, and then we'll get bigger, and then we'll be able to afford cybersecurity. Then you get bigger, and then you focus on doing something else again, and then cyber just gets neglected and neglected, and then it's just
Mm.
building, a house on a very wobbly foundation. It's not going to stand the test of time.
Basically, yeah, building up like a cybersecurity debt almost.
There you go.
We have a question from Sana. Thank you so much for your question. Do you see AI tools themselves, like password managers, as you covered, update automation, introducing new risks, or mostly reducing existing ones?
Introducing new risks, I guess, like anything that's new is always going to introduce a different type of risk. It's also going to probably, like, it's not often discussed, but it might reduce other risks if you're like using an AI tool instead of 10 different tools to try and do the same sort of thing. You're reducing that to one sort of tool as opposed to 10 different organizations or whatever. You can reduce your footprint, I guess, if it can do more for you. So yeah, it'll introduce new risks, but it'll hopefully reduce them in time as cybersecurity companies get a better feel for how they can use it for tracking whatever it is, endpoint detection or just watching hackers on the dark web. There will be uses for good and bad, just like everything else. it's impossible to say which way it's going to be way heavier with right now, because it might be good for a while and then it might be bad, and that's just the way it is with these sorts of things. So we'll see in time as more information is being provided about how hackers are using AI once they're being detected, because that's the bigger issue, is like making sure we're seeing what's going on, and how we kind of prevent that. But it is kind of like that sort of, example of whatever they're going to use to attack, we can use to defend. So it's that balancing act of making sure that we have people who are working on the defense side, because the hackers they're always going to be there. It's never going to stop being a thing that we have to worry about. But hopefully, as time progresses, we can introduce that into the tooling systems. But once it comes down to it, like, and going back to what I was saying initially about the attacks we are seeing utilizing AI, it's a lot of the social engineering stuff, which is absolutely central to these sorts of attacks. It's the same idea of defending yourself against them as it is defending yourself against any other sort of social engineering. And that's going back to like telephone hacking, in the 80s and 90s. Like that's the sort of process that you still have to kind of do. You do your sort of uh yeah, you're like paranoia element of like worrying, considering, should I have received this email? Like, was I expecting someone to send me this attachment? Was I expecting this free £10 Amazon gift voucher? There's all these little things that you kind of have to do. We see a lot of the business email compromise when it like, and people will probably have heard about this one or maybe experienced it themselves in their organization, where a hacker will maybe breach a CEO's or spoof an CEO's email address and then start contacting some junior employees to be like, oh, hi, it's such and such here. Can you go out and get me 200 quid in Amazon vouchers from the local shop? I want to give it to a client. That's a really common attack that has happened in Scotland pretty frequently over the last 2 years. It's such a simple social engineer, and like there's no real AI involved or anything. It's just a sort of trying to replicate something else. It's the same defense used for that it is for anything else. It's like that healthy skepticism around why would why would they be asking that? Maybe I'll ask why they're asking that, or I'll ask someone else, I'll ask my manager, why would they be doing that? So it's having that sort of organization culture as well, coming into it. So it's a funny one because there's no sort of glitzy glamour answer with this. You will have the big cybersecurity companies looking at it being like, oh, we've this really interesting AI tool that's going to prevent everything. But anyone in the industry can tell you for the last 20 or 30 years, people have been saying the same thing. This tool is going to prevent all attacks or whatever. But it's impossible because of the infrastructures that we're using for our technologies. Like vulnerabilities are always going to appear. Hackers are going to appear, are going to find them, and they are going to use different methods of breaching them. So we
Mm.
just have to kind of have the basics ready and then build on that.
Yeah, I think what brings to mind something that you said, and when we discussed this before this call, which was that cybersecurity is more of an art than science, that it just evolves so much that it's about actually trying to, yeah, stay on top of that and find the right kind of solutions.
Yeah.
We have another comment, more of a question, more than a question from Boyd. It's also about promulgating the lessons learned from the well-publicized hack. So it serves as a warning to other organizations of all sizes. For example, with M&S, how it get hacked, the airlines, and jailer Arnold Clark. I haven't even heard yet about the Arnold Clark one. But yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah, the Anna Clark one was a few years ago. And a lot of these they're so much simpler than people often realize, that it is just a simple phishing email that was, downloaded the wrong sort of information. There is quite a lot of information about some of those attacks, the older ones at least, around how they've experienced it. There is a sort of question mark over how public certain organizations are with the information. We always like to see the transparency, because sharing that information means hopefully others will be able to prevent from it. I remember with Erna Clark, when we were involved in the initial stages, kind of supporting them with that, and the ransomware gang involved in it, just that it was a gang, and they had a business operations. And I remember waking up one morning a few weeks later and seeing the Irish news that the HSE had been hacked, which is the equivalent of the NHS, and texting my boss, who was also Irish, and being like, that's the same ransomware gang, 100%. It has their like their fingerprints all over it. You could tell just from the style. So we got in contact, and sure enough, it was. And because of that, we were able to explain to them, right, here's your next 10 days. Here's what they're going to do in each day. And sure enough, to a T, that's the way it was. And it was like that for everyone else as well that they were engaging with. But the initial sort of stages of these things, when it could be like a phishing email or whatever, it's the same approach no matter whether it's this sort of big ransomware gang or it's just a small time criminal who's just trying to like get your credit card details to buy whatever it might be. It's that healthy paranoia that we need. So in time, hopefully more organizations will publicize this. We do see like with the likes of SEPA and other public sector organizations, they're almost obliged to release that information. Um, but it's not really the easiest read because it'll go on to like 100 pages of specific information about how they handle their breach and all that sort of stuff. And it can be difficult to hear about it. But one thing that we try and do just because of our position in Scotland and with the cybersecurity community is try and convince leaders who have experienced these hacks to speak about them publicly. And we'll always make sure that it's a safe space, that they might not want to be recorded, they might not want journalists in the room, but they want to tell other business leaders about what their experience was. And sometimes you just have to go, okay, it's better than not talking about it at all. So during our sessions, like our cyber executive education, we will have leaders from some of the companies mentioned there and also some of the other sort of big cyber attacks on Scottish organizations speaking about what they saw from it. And a lot of the time it starts with, right, I'm not technical and I don't know anything about IT. And that's their experience from there, like, which is completely different as a senior leader in an organization to, who you expect to be managing it, which is the IT people. So yeah, it's about learning from what's been happening, but it's very hard to stay on top of it because so much is happening. We try and release as much information that we're seeing in our threat intelligence bulletins, but it's very hard to keep on top of all these things. You do your best and you try and learn from some of the bigger attacks because we do see the patterns across the different gangs, whether it's Scattered Spider, who seem to have um responsibility for a lot of the big ones over the last while. And their approach to it, kind of looking more for the fame and clout as opposed to the fortune that's involved. There's all these different elements of awareness, but at the same time, we have to kind of bear in mind that some of these bigger attacks are like newsworthy because of the company as opposed to the attack. And we are seeing loads of attacks on small organizations that doesn't make the news, and they might be slightly different. So it's a balancing act between following news cycles about Jaguar Land Rover or M&S or whatever it is, and also kind of realizing that on the ground it is slightly a bit different with smaller organizations, that there are other opportunistic criminals who might not be as targeted because some of these like they can go on for months before an attack is actually the button is pressed on it. They have so much preparation done around it, and that won't happen to every small company because there won't be as big a payout or as big a clout, which is usually the case in these things.
We're a little bit running out of time, but I really wanted to address this question from Sana. So if you could, John, just maybe provide a brief answer to around keeping your digital footprint small for safety. Are there any frameworks on leaving reduced footprints in the digital world?
No, and I mean, like, it's a good point that it is like preventing us from fully engaging with the digital world in all the various places that we might want to. It's very hard, especially like I come from marketing background from years and years ago, and as any marketer will tell you, they have hundreds and hundreds of accounts because they're always trying to find the latest tool to get to the right people and all that sort of stuff. And that's hard to reduce your footprint when you are trying to find the latest thing or whatever. And people like me who work in cybersecurity will always seem a bit more negative about it and don't do this and don't do that. Whereas you have to do this sometimes, you have to take on the risk with these things. There isn't necessarily any frameworks that you can look at. There isn't anything that I would recommend other than considering what you're comfortable with. Um, Always consider like whatever information you're putting into something, what happens if that was ever released or leaked? How secure is the organization that I'm giving my data to? How secure are they going to be? Like, we've seen some absolutely monumental attacks on the likes of Facebook where they released so much personal data from individuals that there's still people getting phone calls because they use their phone number as their sign in for Facebook. Still getting phone calls like 2 or 3 years later about different sort of hacks that people are trying to do on them. Like it's just constant barrage. So And that means then, right, well, what do we do? Not trust Facebook, not trust anyone, and that's not fair either. But it is a thing where you might go, you know what, I'm not going to use my one email address across everything. I'm going to have different throwaway email addresses. So I might have johnbank@gmail.com, and I'll use that for all my banking stuff, right? So if that's ever breached, all I know it's that one. It's not going to be linked to anything else. Or I might just have one for social media and just link it to that. So even even though that the ironic thing is that's increasing your footprint, it does actually manage your footprint in a little bit of a better way. So there's no easy way of doing it, except for like a cautious approach and understanding what sort of data they might be able to use, or what the negative side effects will be if the data was ever leaked from that service.
Great. Thanks so much. I also heard about someone was saying that they report that their card, they lost their bank card every year. So they receive a new card and everyone who has their previous, stole their previous card data now obviously is cut off. But anyway, thank you so much, John, for this incredible conversation, all of your insights. Thank you for everyone who stayed with us, who listened, and who shared and contributed to the conversation. As always, the recording of the webinar will be released later, but we do encourage everyone to follow Scottish AI Scottish AI Playbook on the socials and check our website for future events. And so thank you so much for today, and take care, everyone. Thanks, John.
Cheers.
Bye.